So, have you ever wondered why some leaders, they make these big promises, but then they seem to act in ways that really only benefit a tiny group? Or why some countries just seem stuck, struggling forever, while others really thrive? Well, today's deep dive is going into the Dictator's Handbook, why bad behavior is almost always good politics. It really lays bare the surprisingly rational logic behind political power. It can be pretty ruthless. We're here to pull out the most important bits of knowledge from some really fascinating sources. And today, we're taking a hard look at political authority, using Bueno de Mesquita and Alistair Smith's book as our guide. It's incredibly insightful. Okay, let's really unpack this because, this isn't just some dry academic thing.
No, not at all.
People have called it lucidly written, shrewdly argued meditation on how democrats and dictators preserve political authority. It really flips conventional wisdom, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It's fantastically thought-provoking. Really makes you question some basic assumptions about politics. And it's got that Freakonomics kind of feel,
Yeah.
packed with clever examples sometimes, kind of shocking ones from the real world.
Right.
Which gives a lot of weight to its cynical analysis. But what's really powerful, I think, is how it treats all political systems, democracies, the worst dictatorships, everything, as basically operating under the same set of universal rules.
Yeah.
It really deepens how we understand power itself.
So, okay, our mission here is to pull out those rules to rule by that the authors talk about. We want to get not just what is, but, why what is in the political world. Because the book argues political behavior isn't just chaos, it's dictated by rules. And the goal, like they say, is to learn these rules so maybe it becomes a game we can win. First, by understanding how the world actually works, and then maybe thinking about how to make it better. So when we think about leaders, powerful people, a king, a president, maybe even a CEO, we often picture them alone, right? Wielding all this power by themselves. But is that ever really true? Does any leader, no matter how powerful they seem, actually operate solo?
Not a chance. That's really a core insight of the book, or maybe an uncomfortable one. No leader is monolithic. It just challenges that whole idea of absolute power. Take Louis XIV, right? The Sun King of France.
It's c'est moi.
Exactly. The state, it is me.
Yeah.
Famous line. But even Louis, he reigned for over 70 years, basically built the modern French state. Even he couldn't rule alone. He absolutely needed support. And the book points out, after he really consolidated his power, he didn't just kick back. He actively created this new class of aristocrats, the noblesse de robe. And he opened up officer ranks in the army to way more people than just the old traditional families. He made sure their income, their status, it all depended on him. This wasn't charity, it was strategy. It just shows that fundamental truth. Every leader, whatever their title, needs a base. They need people to keep them in power.
Okay, so that leads us right into the book's basic framework. The tools they use to compare, totally different systems using the same basic ideas. They call it the 3 dimensions of politics or Selectorate theory. It defines those different support groups, and it's really key to understanding everything else they talk about.
Exactly right. So the book breaks down any political system, could be a country, a company, even your local chess club, into 3 key groups. First, there's the nominal selectorate. They also call them interchangeable.
Interchangeables, okay.
This is basically everyone who has some kind of legal say, even a tiny one, in choosing the leader. So in the U.S., that's all your eligible voters. In the old Soviet Union, it was technically all adult citizens, even if their choice was just yes or no to one candidate picked by the party.
So not much real choice there.
Pretty much. They have, as the book puts it, a toe in the political door, but not much more. Second group. The real selectorate, or the influentials. These are the people who actually choose the leader.
Ah, okay. Like the Electoral College.
Exactly. Electoral College electors in the U.S., or maybe the Communist Party members who actually picked the General Secretary back in the USSR. They have real influence. And then finally, the most critical group, the winning coalition, or the essentials. This is the smallest group, the absolute minimum number of people from that real selectorate whose support is essential to keep the leader in power. These are the folks whose loyalty you have to keep no matter what.
Wow. Okay. So this framework, it really changes how you look at things. It suggests governments aren't fundamentally different kinds of things. They just differ along the dimensions of their selectorates and winning coalitions. Is that right?
That's the core idea.
So labels like democracy or dictatorship, they're just convenient shorthand. They kind of hide this huge range in how big these groups actually are.
Precisely. It's more like a spectrum, not just black and white. A dictatorship, in this view, usually means a government built on a particularly small number of essentials, drawn from a huge group of interchangeables.
Tiny group holding the real power.
Right. There's a democracy means you've got a very large number of essentials and a very large number of interchangeables. The influential group is almost as big as the whole pool of potential voters. It's all about the mechanics of power, the numbers, not just the labels we stick on them.
Fascinating. Okay, so if that's the structure everywhere, how do leaders actually stay in power? Doesn't matter the system. What are these rules to rule by that the book says govern political survival?
Well, it really boils down to a fundamental trade-off.
Yeah.
Every leader faces this constantly when they decide how to spend money, right? Revenue comes in. Where does it go? Do they spend it on public goods? Things that benefit everybody. Roads, schools, clean water, national defense.
Things we generally think governments should provide.
Right. Or do they spend it on private goods, which are direct benefits going only to a few key supporters? Think huge salaries, government contracts, monopolies, maybe just bags of cash. And the book argues that a smart politician's choice here depends entirely on one thing: the number of essentials in the coalition. How many people do you really need to keep happy? And this isn't just small decisions. It shapes the whole system. If you have a large winning coalition, like in a strong democracy, it's just way too expensive to buy everyone off with private goodies.
Yeah.
So leaders are pushed towards providing public goods. It's more efficient.
Okay.
But in those small coalition regimes, dictatorships, autocracies, private rewards are the cheapest, most effective way to lock in loyalty.
That makes immediate sense when you think about corruption. The book says it's endemic to small coalition regimes. You see it in places like the IOC, the Olympics Committee, or FIFA, the soccer guys.
Exactly.
The book points out the IOC only needs, 58 votes to pick a president or a host city, and FIFA just 13 votes out of 24 execs to choose a World Cup site.
Precisely. And when the group you need to convince is that small things like bribery, fancy trips, personal favors, they become incredibly efficient tools.
Why wouldn't they?
Yeah, why wouldn't they? It works. It's way cheaper than trying to make millions of people happy with good schools or roads. You see these bid committees spending fortunes whining and dining a handful of officials for those critical votes. The book's point is, this isn't some weird flaw. It's a direct result of how small coalition systems work. It's rational in a way.
Okay, so beyond outright bribes, how else do leaders manage resources? You mentioned taxation. The book has some surprising things there, right? Like Iran having higher tax rates than Turkey, but getting less actual revenue.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point, because if the public isn't seeing benefits, it gets really hard to track income and collect taxes effectively. People hide their work, their profits. But, we shouldn't think leaders in democracies are saints either. They absolutely use public policies as rewards for their supporters. It's just that their coalition is much bigger.
Yeah.
Think about policies from Republicans versus Democrats in the U.S. Tax cuts often aimed at wealthier groups versus social programs aimed at lower income groups. The book argues these are essentially private rewards too, just distributed more broadly through policy. They're payments for political support, designed to keep their large coalitions voting for them. It ensures their survival too.
The book doesn't shy away from the darker side either. What happens if you mess up managing your coalition? Purges come to mind.
Oh, absolutely. Purges are a brutal tool, but effective for autocrats.
Right.
Think Saddam Hussein.
Right.
He executed something like 450 leaders. Many of these guys had helped him get power. But he did it to shrink his coalition, make everyone remaining absolutely dependent on him, totally loyal, even if it meant getting rid of smart, capable people.
Chilling.
And Hitler's Night of Long Knives, getting rid of Ernst Röhm and the SA leadership, same idea. Secure absolute control by eliminating potential rivals within your own support base. The book contrasts this with someone like Gorbachev. He pushed rivals out, sure, but he didn't kill them.
And the result?
Well, according to the authors, his reward was a pretty short time in power. He eventually lost control after that coup attempt and Yeltsin taking over. It's a grim lesson about ruthlessness and survival in those systems.
And it's not just purges. The book says underpaying your coalition can be just as deadly. It talks about Julius Caesar.
Yeah, and also mob boss Big, Paul Castellano. Two very different examples, same lesson. Caesar, his reforms, ending tax farming, helping with debt, they were popular with ordinary Romans, but they seriously ticked off the powerful influentials and essentials who were making a killing off the old system. He tried to help the many at the expense of the few who kept him in power. Big mistake. Cost him his life.
And the mob boss?
Castellano basically got too greedy. started enriching himself way more than his key supporters, thought he was untouchable. He wasn't. He got whacked for it. So the lesson the book hammers home is, too many good deeds or too much greed are equally punished if the coalition loses out as a result. You got to pay the people who matter. You got to know what they expect, get it wrong, and you're out, or worse.
So these rules, they're not just domestic politics. The book shows how they really shape international relations too, things like foreign aid, natural resources, even why and how countries go to war.
Definitely. Foreign aid is a big one.
Huh?
The book is kind of a wake-up call there. It argues aid isn't mostly about helping poor people like we usually think or hope.
Oh.
It's often given to make the constituents and donor states better off, meaning it serves the political goals of the government giving the aid.
Okay.
And crucially, it's used to purchase loyalty and influence from the governments getting the aid, even if they're corrupt dictators. They use this really stark example. U.S. aid to Liberia under Sergeant Doe back in the Cold War.
I remember that name.
The amount of aid the U.S. gave was almost exactly the amount Doe and his buddies were supposedly stealing. The aid wasn't really for Liberians. It was to keep Doe happy and anti-Soviet. When the Cold War ended, poof, the aid dried up. Then there's the whole resource curse. It's fascinating. The book shows nations with lots of easily extracted resources, think oil in Nigeria, often end up autocratic. They have worse economic growth, more civil wars, and it's not just bad luck or bad leaders. The book says the resources themselves create incentives against good government.
How does that work?
Well, if a leader can get rich just by pumping oil or mining diamonds, they don't need to tax their people much.
Ah, okay.
And if you don't need to tax people, you don't need their consent. You don't need to provide good schools or healthcare or roads to keep them productive and willing to pay taxes. You just extract the wealth. Use it to pay off your small group of essentials, and you can pretty much ignore everyone else. Keep them poor, uneducated, disorganized.
That's bleak. And what about war? We usually think wars are about ideology or territory or national interest.
Well, the authors argue it's simpler, maybe more cynical. They say autocrats and democrats fight over the exact same thing, staying in power. But just how they fight that differs, because their coalitions are different.
Okay, explain that.
Autocrats, they argue, kind of follow Sun Tzu's advice, but maybe twisted. Fight casually for stuff, land, slaves, treasure. They prioritize keeping their cronies loyal over actually winning wars efficiently. And they spend less money protecting soldiers because the average soldier isn't part of their essential coalition. Think Egypt's army and the Six-Day War generals got perks, but the equipment wasn't always the best.
Mm-hmm.
The book even mentions Russia pulling out of World War I. Lenin needed resources for his Bolshevik supporters back home. Political survival trumped fighting the war.
And democracies.
Democrats, they say, are closer to, like the Weinberger doctrine. Fight when you have to, focus on policy goals that benefit their large voting base. They invest heavily in protecting soldiers, training them well, think Israel in the Six-Day War, or the U.S. investing in things like MRAPs during the Iraq surges. Because soldiers and their families are voters. They're part of the coalition. And because they need public support based on results, democracies tend to hang around after wars to enforce settlements, sometimes setting up new governments. They need to show their large coalition they achieved the policy aims. It's about a long-term win for the many.
Okay, so if leaders are usually so good at this game, rewarding their loyalists, playing by these rules to stay in power, when do things actually change? How do revolutions or big reforms ever happen?
That's a great question. Change usually happens at these really critical moments. The authors have this great summary. Change comes with a new boss, a dying boss, or a bankrupt boss.
Okay.
In those situations, the essential coalition, those key supporters, suddenly get nervous. Their loyalty starts to wobble. Why? Because the leader might not be able to deliver the rewards anymore. Or with a new boss, they don't know if they'll keep getting rewards. The payoff structure gets uncertain.
We've definitely seen examples of that. The book mentions Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines, the Shah of Iran.
Exactly. Both were terminally ill. As soon as their supporters realized the boss was on his way out, they started looking for new deals, new partners. People like Corazon Aquino or Ayatollah Khomeini to secure their own futures. Loyalty vanished quick.
And the bankrupt bosses.
Same story, different reason. The Russian Tsar before the revolution, Louis XVI in France, the Soviet Union under Gorbachev, they all basically ran out of money. When you can't pay your key supporters, the army, the bureaucrats, the cronies, they have no reason to stick with you. The regime just collapses because its essential coalition defects. Money talks.
So this raises a tricky point for autocrats, doesn't it? The book talks about this balancing act.
It does. They need to allow some freedom, right? Enough so people are productive, generate some wealth that can be taxed or skimmed,
Uh-huh.
but not too much freedom, because that allows people to organize, to protest, maybe overthrow you.
Right.
So the book explains how shocks, maybe an economic crisis, a natural disaster, a clearly rigged election can be triggers. They can suddenly push people into the streets. And what happens next often depends on the security forces. Are they part of the essential coalition? Are they confident they'll get paid under the current leader? Or are they maybe hedging their bets?
Like in Ukraine's Orange Revolution.
Exactly. The outgoing leader, Kuchma, was retiring. His chosen successor, Yanukovych, faced huge protests. But the security forces weren't sure they'd keep their jobs and perks under Yanukovych, so they hesitated. They didn't crack down hard, and the revolution succeeded.
And the opposite example, Myanmar.
Yeah, after Cyclone Nargis. The dictator, Than Shwe, actively blocked foreign aid. He even broke up survivor camps. Why? Because he understood that large groups of desperate, angry people are dangerous. He prioritized regime survival over helping his own citizens, dispersing the potential threat, small coalition thinking in action.
Okay, so we've spent a lot of time on what is the often uncomfortable reality the book describes. But the authors do push towards what not to be. They're not saying we can achieve perfection, but that even minor improvements in governance can result in significant improvements in the welfare of potentially millions of people. So how do we actually do that? What are the fixes?
Right, and their core solution, the main fix they propose, is actually quite simple in concept, though maybe hard in practice. It's expanding the winning coalition.
Making that group of essentials bigger.
Exactly. Because if you need more people to stay in power, it fundamentally changes your incentives as a leader. It gets too expensive to buy loyalty with just private deals and corruption. You're forced, essentially, to provide more public goods, things that benefit that larger coalition, and often everyone else too. This is the central fix the book offers. Make the coalition bigger.
So how does that translate into concrete actions? The book gives several examples, right? Starting with corporate governance.
Yeah, they apply the logic there too. Instead of CEOs and boards just answering to a few powerful insiders or board members, reform should aim to make them genuinely accountable to the millions of shareholders.
So shifting the essentials in a company.
Precisely. And that's not just theory. It could mean real changes in how companies are run. Maybe less focus on short-term executive bonuses and more on long-term value that benefits all shareholders, and by extension, maybe broader society.
And then there's electoral reform. Things like gerrymandering.
Oh yeah, gerrymandering is a classic way politicians effectively shrink their real accountability. By drawing weird district lines, they basically pick their voters, ensuring they only need to appeal to a narrow base within that district.
So the fix is?
Independent commissions drawing the lines, taking it out of the hands of the politicians who benefit. Makes them accountable to a broader, more representative group of voters.
And the Electoral College in the U.S.?
The book argues that's another mechanism that keeps the winning coalition smaller than the popular vote. A candidate can win the presidency with, as they put it, surprisingly small amount of support if it's distributed efficiently across the right states.
Like Lincoln, they mention. Very efficient win.
Right. He won with under 40% of the popular vote. The book argues eliminating the Electoral College would force candidates to seek broader support across the entire population, effectively enlarging the winning coalition needed for the presidency.
Okay, what about immigration? How does that fit?
Well, the argument is that easy citizenship is actually good for governance in the long run.
How so?
Because when immigrants become citizens, they become voters. They join the nominal selectorate, potentially the real selectorate, and eventually influence the winning coalition. This increases the pressure on leaders to provide public goods for everyone, including newcomers. It contrasts sharply with, say, guest worker programs like in the Middle East, where workers come, contribute economically, but have no path to citizenship, no political voice. They can't pressure the rulers for better treatment or services.
Interesting. And technology. Seems counterintuitive that autocrats might allow it.
Yeah, but think about mobile phones, the internet. The book uses the example of Burma, where SIM cards used to cost a fortune, like over $1,000.
Wow. Why so expensive?
Because the regime knew technology helps people coordinate, share information, organize protests.
Yeah.
But at the same time, autocrats often need the economic growth that technology enables. So even allowing costly access can inadvertently empower people. It forces a degree of liberalization. They mentioned J.J. Rawlings in Ghana, who reluctantly democratized partly because he needed the economic benefits of engaging with the world, which meant letting information flow more freely.
Okay, and a couple more provocative ideas at the end. Foreign aid restructuring.
Right. Instead of just handing over money based on promises, they propose using escrow accounts. The aid money sits there and is only released when the recipient government actually delivers on predefined policy changes.
So pay for performance,
Yeah,
basically.
exactly. Tie the money directly to actions that benefit the public, not just the leader's bank account. Forces reform instead of enabling corruption.
And the last one, golden parachutes for dictators. That sounds controversial.
It is controversial, absolutely. But the argument is pragmatic. Think about how messy and bloody transitions away from dictatorships can be. What if you could offer a dictator a deal? Trade the power of office in exchange for the right to the money they've likely already stashed away. Let them retire comfortably somewhere. Perhaps like how the British monarchy transitioned from absolute power to a constitutional role over time.
So buy them off to leave peacefully.
Essentially, it sounds distasteful, rewarding bad behavior, but the authors argue it could potentially save thousands, maybe millions of lives, and accelerate a move towards better governance by avoiding violent conflict. It's a trade-off. So at the end of the day, the really profound insight, I think, is that just about all of political life revolves around the size of the Selectorate, the influentials, and the winning coalition. It's this simple framework that explains so much seemingly complex behavior.
It really does. And the book leaves you with this, well, this uncomfortable truth, doesn't it? Using that quote from Shakespeare, "The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves." Because, the authors argue, we, the people, care so much for ourselves and so little for the world's underlings. That's a harsh take.
It is. But they also offer a sliver of hope. They suggest that the very corruption and inefficiency baked into these small coalition systems, eventually it creates weakness. It leads to that crucial moment of opportunity for change. The system contains the seeds of its own potential failure.
Which leads to their final call to action, really.
Yeah. Expand them all, and the interchangeables no more quickly than the coalition, and everything changes for the better for the vast majority of people. When that coalition grows, people are liberated to work harder on their own behalf to become better educated, healthier, wealthier, happier, and free. Their taxes are reduced, and their opportunities in life expand dramatically.
So, the provocative thought we want to leave you with today is this. Think about the power you might have, even in small ways, to influence the size of winning coalitions around you. Maybe in your local community, your workplace, how you engage with your government. How does this framework apply? What kind of changes could focusing on expanding that essential group actually spark? Lots to think about there.